Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of Coffee with Cosimo, where we're going to talk about real world assets. My name is Ciarán Hines. I'm managing partner at Cosimo Ventures, and delighted to be joined this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, by Adam Bouktila. Adam is, well, Adam, I'll let you introduce yourself, but you've got a true international background, and he's joining us from the Netherlands today. So, Adam, very welcome, and please give us your background and background on Defactor.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kieran, and thanks very much for having me. So, yeah, bit of background on myself, kind of a jack of all trades. I've been around the crypto, blockchain, Web3 space since maybe 2017, 2018. Since then, I've had the privilege of being a part of multiple projects, lots of different token-based or tokenization projects. When the whole NFT or non-fungible token boom kicked off, I was involved in lots of projects there. So, yeah, previous or my kind of PB or pre-blockchain life, I was a consultant, so I worked in financial services, so helping out accounts payable, procure to pay, integrating that software with different kind of SMEs and large companies. So I've been around the block a little bit. I was always interested in the practical solutions, so how blockchain could actually solve some of these problems, how it could make some of these things easier, simpler, etc. So fast forward maybe 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, we founded Defactor. So a part of the founding team there. I'm now project lead, so I'm taking charge essentially of the business development, partnerships, kind of everything that's non-tech. I like to say that I'm technical enough to be dangerous or know when I'm being overcharged, but I'm not a techie. So
Very
de
good.
facto really specializes in everything to do with tokenization and real world assets. So this is when somebody wants to represent something in the real world and they want to tokenize it. They do that using our technology. So yeah, I assume we're going to get into it a bit more, Kieran. So
Absolutely, yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, every conference you go to now, every webinar you attend, there a conversation around real world assets comes up, and it's a real buzz phrase, if you like, at the
yeah.
moment. But for people, again, the series is for people who are new to blockchain. What does it mean? What does real world assets really, mean when people talk about it?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's a good question because we can be so stuck in our bubble sometimes that we're just saying these things, and a lot of people are like, I don't really know what you mean. Funnily enough, Kieran, when I came into the space in 2017, we were actually talking about a lot of the same things, right? Tokenizing or creating a digital asset or a crypto asset based on a physical item or something that exists in the real world. So this could be a tangible asset. This could be a piece of gold or a watch or a piece of real estate could be something intangible. It could be a stock. It could be some private credit or an invoice. But essentially, it's these things that exist in the real world, many different types of asset classes, and they can be tokenized or represented digitally on a blockchain. And you would do that for a whole range of reasons. But some of the examples, some people may be familiar with things like stable coins. So stable coins are pegged to the US dollar. I would argue that that's an example of a real world asset. People's minds usually go to real estate. Most people are living in a home or apartment and their mind goes to there to say, wow, can I tokenize this? Can I tokenize the place that I'm sitting? Then there's commodities, there's art. I mean, it really is wide ranging. But when we say tokenization, we mean representing those assets in the real world on a blockchain.
Yeah. And what are the benefits of that? I mean, certainly get what you're saying. Anything can be basically tokenized. Any real world asset can be tokenized and put on a blockchain, and people can own part of it. But what are the real benefits?
Yeah, and to be honest, Karen, it really does depend on the industry, right? So if a lot of people, when they talk about the benefits of tokenization, they're straight away going to say things like transparency or efficiency, streamlining some of these. But to be honest, let's really actually dig in, right? If you think of a process like agriculture or coffee production or to take the precious metals or gemstones, all of these asset classes or businesses, they're completely different, but they do lack a lot of transparency. End to end, it's hard to see what's happening, who actually owns what, how the assets are being valued. But if you take a really practical example with something like gold, gold is something that, yes, you can hold, you can hoard it, you can bury it in your back garden, but it's very hard to take around with you. It's very hard to break that bar of gold into smaller pieces and fractionalize it. So when thinking about it, that way, these are the potential benefits. When you represent something on a blockchain, you're essentially making a digital twin of that thing that then can be transferred. It's borderless. It can go from one person to another. It can be peer-to-peer without intermediaries. You can transfer these assets. So there are really a whole host, but I think it's important, Ciarán, to start from the asset class level and say, for example, precious metals, what are the benefits there? Agriculture, what are the benefits there? Because to be honest, you really can make a case for a lot of them.
Yeah, because you've hit on an important point there. I think, and what you're really talking about is the democratization of some real world assets that previously would have been out of the reach of most people. One of the most funny, you're in the Netherlands actually, because one of the most interesting ones that I've come across was fractional ownership in a Van Gogh painting. So that, I mean, I'm not in a position where I can go out and buy a Van Gogh painting like most people, but I can have fractional ownership in that. And I thought that was one of the most interesting things. So talk a little bit about that democratization, a bit more about, how accessible it's making assets that were previously out of the reach of people.
Absolutely. If you take those asset classes like a Picasso painting or some type of, like, generally it's out of reach for 99.99% of the world right now. If you take one of those paintings and you break it into a million pieces, all of a sudden it lowers that barrier to entry. It lowers that initial investment that you would need. And some people say, why would you want that fraction? For a host of reasons. Maybe you want to hedge against inflation. Like, art values have gone crazy over the past 20 years. If you zoom out, most of these asset classes have. So a lot of people want exposure to these, but it can be difficult, especially for people in certain parts of the world, for them to get access to real estate or to get access to even some of these financial assets. Like, half of my family are from Tunisia and North Africa, and this is no disrespect to them, but a lot of my family wouldn't know how to purchase a treasury bill or to do anything like this. And that's no disrespect to there, but it's just they don't have the access. So it's democratization, but it's also inclusion for people. And I like to say it that it lowers the barrier to entry. So you can actually get access to a lot of these where previously it just wasn't possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk a little bit about the high level process of tokenizing these real world assets,
Yeah.
just to make it really simple for people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, it all starts on what do you want to tokenize? So what is that piece? So let's just, for ease, let's stick with the painting for a sec. So you have the painting, you've got it on your wall, you want to tokenize that. Well, where do you start? Pretty simply, you could just get a developer or somebody who knows how to create a million tokens, then all of a sudden you've got a million pieces of that painting. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, Ciarán. You're going to have to get somebody to either custody those assets. So who's holding that painting? You may have to get a third party to say that, yes, this is authentic. I'm going to give a proof of authenticity. I'm going to give so while you can do a lot of this stuff on chain, I can go tokenize my cat now if I want. But for that to actually be real, or for you to have true ownership of that, you're going to have to go through the valuation, the due diligence processes that exist there. And finally, it's the legal structuring, right? Because if you're going to issue a token, you have to be super clear on what that token is going to do. So with art, are you actually owning that? Are you owning a piece of the return? With real estate, for example, are you getting a piece of the rental income from the property, or do you actually own the property? So it's super important to actually drill down. And if somebody says, I'm tokenizing X, you ask, well, why? What's the purpose of that? And what type of token is that? Because that will always kind of, I guess, draw the picture of what you need to do. So I guess to summarize, what is the asset that you want to tokenize? How do you get a correct valuation and custody over those assets? Do you have the correct legal structuring to be able to do it? Then it's great. You can go in, create that token on one of the thousands of blockchains that exist, and then you go and get that listed, and potentially people can trade it. Now, I've made it sound very simple, but in reality, it can be quite a challenge, especially depending on the asset class.
Yeah. Those challenges exist though in the real business world as well,
Sure, absolutely.
regardless of if you're buying a real estate asset, you still have those issues to deal with and all the legals, etc. But it's interesting. You talked about custody there. Is that a risk? Are there other risks in this whole process that people should
Absolutely.
be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, think of custody. I'm going to just keep throwing examples because they are real world, right? So we'll keep just throwing real world examples to see. But I was in Dubai recently and I met a company that are tokenizing classic cars. And straight away, my antenna went up. I love cars. I was like, great, how is this going to work? But the first question that I asked was, where are the cars? Where are they being stored? Who has custody over that? Is there video? Is there security? What happens if the warehouse goes on fire? What happens if, the owner's son takes one of the Ferraris out for a drive? All of these things come into the equation, and they are the risks. There's also, as I said, so a lot of when you're doing custody, there would be potentially like an IoT device or some sensors that could be tracking that actual asset. But then there's data connectivity issues, right? What happens if you lose connection? You don't know where those assets are. This can be mitigated by getting a trusted custodian or somebody who is able to hold those assets and issue essentially a receipt or to say that they have the assets, they are authentic. So that's how you can get around that. But it is always very important to ask when somebody's tokenizing something in the real world, where are those goods? Who has ownership of that? Is that ownership by a person? Is it by an SPV? Is it by a trust? These are all the questions that are really important to ask because that will allow you to plan your next move. And I think what's so exciting about the RWA or real world asset market is that it is quite understandable compared to a lot of other concepts in the crypto world or blockchain world, etc. You can take things from the real world, represent them digitally. You do it for a whole host of reasons that we said, but you do have to be prepared for some of those risks. And the final one, which I think we probably will touch on as well, is some of those regulatory risks, as we said. So when you sell a token out of the Netherlands or out of Ireland or out of the USA, there's fundamentally different ways of doing it and different ways of doing business in different parts of the world. So there are some of the risks.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, yeah, and thank you for bringing up probably one of the most extreme examples because, when you're tokenizing something like bonds or gold or real estate, there's more traditional ways of custodying things like that, as opposed to, vintage cars or sports cars or whatever. That
And for the valuations as well. So with gold, there's a spot price, right? So you're
yeah,
easily able to say, I've got X amount of gold, so this is how we do it. And even then, for example, if you wanted to, I don't think we've touched on this yet, but another benefit of holding some of these tokenized assets is you can use them as collateral if you wanted to do lending and borrowing. So let's say you have a piece of that Picasso or house and it's worth 10K, you could go and take a loan against that asset. But again, it only really works for assets that have either a price or something that you're able to value those assets from. So yeah, very interesting.
yeah. Something is always linked as well with real world assets is this whole, the buzzword is DeFi or
Yeah.
decentralized finance. Can you just explain in simple terms to people what DeFi is
Yeah,
as
for sure.
to real world assets?
So when I think about DeFi, I guess it's kind of a catch-all term at this point, right? It's like financial services or financial concepts that exist in this kind of crazy decentralized world. So it's peer-to-peer lending. Maybe it's financial services without an intermediary in the middle. So again, to further that example with a piece of gold, if I had the gold, I could lock it as collateral. You could give me a loan based on the value of that gold. And if I don't pay back, my assets get liquidated. As we said, there's a global spot price for gold. There's a market you can sell it into. So you could actually run that whole concept of lending and borrowing just with smart contracts and with two people. You don't need that intermediary if you've got the smart contracts in the middle. So that's kind of explaining DeFi. In essence, people now have gone crazy with some of the concepts, and it's really, I suppose, impressive to see a lot of the innovations that's happening when you can open up these decentralized markets. But in essence, it is that it's peer-to-peer lending or interactions between peers without those intermediaries.
Yeah, very good. So, well, just to finish up then, what's the size of the market currently today? And, what do you think is next? What's the next big thing in the area?
Yeah, there's some pretty good resources out there. There's a site called rwa.xyz or XYZ, however you want to say it. And that gives some insights into the market size and what's going on there. Essentially, you're looking at outstanding loans in the region of about $8 billion. And that's just in the private credit market, right? Then you've got the total market cap of all of these RWA projects. That fluctuates daily, as we all know, but that's somewhere in the region of about $8 or $9 billion as well. So these are not insignificant numbers in the grand scheme of things. In the financial world, we're still tiny, right? We're still emerging and coming out. And I like to say, Ciarán, we're still in the storytelling phase. We have to prove a lot of these models and show a lot of what we've talked about, why it's interesting for a piece of gold or a house or an artwork to be tokenized, and what are the things that you can actually do. And while, yeah, I'm from Ireland, I live in Ireland, I'm now in the Netherlands. And while it's interesting in places like that in Northern Europe and developed countries, it's more interesting for developing nations, for countries that have maybe skipped a lot, went straight to 4G. They've got massive mobile penetration. This is where this can be really transformative, giving people in those parts of the world access to these asset classes.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, it's a fascinating space. We use baseball parlance over here all the time. We say we're still in the first inning,
Yep.
maybe in the bottom of the first, but we're still in the first inning. So we'll watch it closely. But Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. Fascinating conversation, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.